Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today, especially if you're a manager or a management student trying to make sense of the often chaotic, sometimes maddening world of workplace dynamics. Today, we're going to gain a kind of superpower. Basically, we're getting X-ray vision. We are going to decode the hidden drivers behind workplace conflict and finally understand why your teams sometimes feel like they are speaking completely different languages.
All right, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. Today we are covering 1. When reasonable people disagree, 2. What are institutional logics, 3. 7 major societal logics, 4. How logics shape organizations, 5. When invisible rulebooks collide, and 6. The manager's diagnostic toolkit. Okay, let's dive in and get you equipped.
Section 1. When reasonable people disagree. Let's kick things off with a painful, yet entirely relatable management problem that I'm betting almost all of you have lived through firsthand. Imagine your company is trying to decide whether to launch a new product earlier than planned. Right on cue, chaos erupts. We've all been there. The commercial team sees a closing market window and is vehemently arguing that speed is everything. The engineers, on the other hand, are focused on reliability. They're demanding way more testing. Meanwhile, legal is raising red flags about regulatory compliance, and the local community is worried about environmental impacts. As a manager in the hot seat, it's really easy to just think people are being difficult. But here's the twist. Everyone is actually acting completely reasonably within their own frame of reference. They aren't just being selfish. They are using fundamentally different ideas about what makes a good decision, what evidence actually matters, and who should have authority in the first place. Section 2. What are institutional logics? This is the academic paradigm shift that immediately helps us make sense of all that boardroom chaos. The core concept here is called institutional logics. Building on the research of Thornton, Ocasio, and Lounsbury, this framework shifts our attention to the wider systems of meaning that dictate how people interpret organizational life. The word institutional is the key here. It tells us we're looking at broad societal patterns that extend way beyond just one person's opinion or one company's culture. They are backed up by laws, professions, and centuries of tradition. And the word logic refers to a recognizable organizing rationale. We're not just talking about your personal values. For example, a manager might personally value fairness, sure, but a state logic legally embeds that fairness into public accountability and strict formal procedures. These logics are the invisible rulebooks running the show. So how do we spot these in the wild? Well, you can't just look at an org chart. You have to play detective and look at what a group treats as entirely self-evident. How exactly do they define success? Is it all about profit or technical quality or maybe community service? Where does authority come from? Is it the boss's hierarchical position, professional expertise, or a democratic mandate? Look at what evidence they pay attention to, how they coordinate, and even their timelines. Honestly, you can see it in everyday practices. Who gets invited to the big meeting? What indicators are front and center on the dashboard? And who actually gets to sign off on a decision? Section 3. 7 major societal logics. So, what actually are these specific, invisible rulebooks? Let's reveal them. Researchers have identified 7 major societal orders that provide these influential logics. First up, the market logic, where success equals profit and authority follows purchasing power. Second, corporate logic, which is totally driven by hierarchy and managerial control. Third, professional logic, resting on specialized expertise and technical quality. Fourth is state logic, centered around law, democratic legitimacy, and equal treatment. Fifth, we have community logic, driven by trust and collective well-being. Sixth is family logic, grounded in kinship and generations. And finally, religious logic, organized through faith and moral obligation. Now keep in mind, these are analytical ideal types. In the real world, actual organizations are usually mixing a bunch of these together just to function. Now, notice the really crucial distinction here between market and corporate logics. These two get mistakenly lumped together all the time. A market logic is all about external competition, price signals, and customer choice. A corporate logic, conversely, is all about internal hierarchy, managerial control, and strict coordination. Think about what that means. A company can be aggressively focused on market competition on the outside while relying on a super rigid corporate hierarchy on the inside. Or a specific unit might use internal market mechanisms even though it's still part of a bigger corporate structure. Getting this difference right is absolutely vital for any manager navigating structural changes. Section 4. How logics shape organizations. Let's look at how these rulebooks fundamentally alter day-to-day organizational life. You see, these logics don't just sit quietly in the background. They actively shape literally everything. Crucially, they direct attention. Since no organization can focus on everything at once, logics act as heavy-duty filters. A market logic forcefully directs attention toward competitors and pricing, whereas a professional logic foregrounds standards and expert judgment. This is wild because it means two different departments can look at the exact same data report and identify completely different problems. Their internal rulebooks are pointing their attention in totally different directions. So when you're frustrated thinking a colleague just doesn't get it, it's usually because they are quite literally attending to a different slice of reality. Logics also define goals and measures, and this is incredibly consequential. Measures do so much more than just record outcomes. They direct effort, they allocate status, and they determine which initiatives actually survive. Having a beautifully balanced dashboard on your wall doesn't automatically mean you have balanced logics. If you want to uncover an organization's true operative logic, don't waste time reading their public mission statement. Instead, ruthlessly follow the metrics. Look at how rewards, promotions, and budgets are really handed out. If one single metric dictates who gets promoted while the others are just window dressing, well, the true hierarchy of logics in that company is crystal clear.
Section 5. When invisible rulebooks collide. What happens when these different rulebooks overlap, clash, or start competing for dominance? The key takeaway here is actually a really reassuring one. Having multiple logics running at the same time, what academics call institutional complexity, is a completely normal feature of organizational life. It is not a bug to be fixed. Sure, it can cause friction, but it can also massively stimulate innovation. In fact, totally new organizational forms often pop up specifically because people figure out clever ways to connect demands that used to be seen as completely incompatible. So, take a deep breath. That complexity you're sweating over, it's just par for the course. These different rulebooks can interact in a few predictable ways. Sometimes one logic achieves total dominance, making all the big decisions. Other times, companies use separation. Say, the technical experts handle quality standards while the commercial folks handle pricing, keeping their worlds nicely compartmentalized. You might see cooperation, where each logic brings something the other one needs. But yeah, often it leads straight to competition and conflict. When that happens, teams might settle for negotiated coexistence, dividing up decision rights without ever fully agreeing. Or they might achieve real hybridization, blending elements together, like a business that chases commercial revenue while formally baking ecological goals into its resource allocation.
Let's ground this with a real-world scenario. Imagine an engineering consultancy. The engineers define their success through technically perfect solutions. That's a professional logic. But the commercial managers are entirely focused on client acquisition and hitting tight deadlines, a classic market logic. So you hit a quality snag. Do you delay the launch despite a huge commercial opportunity? If you force one logic to completely crush the other, you are going to lose either your credibility or your financial viability. As a manager, you have to recognize the type of disagreement you're dealing with. A simple calculation of expected profit is never, ever going to settle a dispute that is fundamentally rooted in a professional sense of duty.
Section 6. The Manager's Diagnostic Toolkit. Let's take all this fascinating academic theory and turn it into a practical, step-by-step tool you can use on Monday morning.
Next time you walk into a complex situation, use this 5-step diagnostic process as your X-ray vision. First, ask, what different definitions of success and legitimate authority are actually in play here? Second, identify what types of evidence are getting attention and what professional identities are on the line. Third, analyze the structures. Which logic is genuinely embedded in the reward system? Fourth, map out the interactions. Are these logics competing, separated, or complementing each other? And fifth, consciously design an arrangement that preserves the best of each logic while bringing the necessary trade-offs out into the open. Armed with this toolkit, you quickly realize that forceful advocacy, basically just yelling louder from within your own logic, almost never persuades anyone else. What you really need is translation. Translation means taking your proposal and connecting it to the values the other group actually cares about. For instance, if you're pitching a new sustainability initiative, don't just preach about the environment. Translate it. Frame it as commercial resilience for the market-driven folks, technical integrity for the engineers, regulatory preparedness for legal, and community responsibility for local stakeholders. You have to learn to speak their institutional languages to get everyone pulling in the same direction. As we wrap up our explainer today, I want to leave you with a really powerful thought straight from the core research. Organizational life becomes more intelligible when we understand the different logics through which people are trying to make it work. Honestly, understanding these logics completely replaces that frustrating false assumption that your coworkers are just being irrational. They aren't irrational. They are simply operating in plural organizational worlds, following rulebooks you just couldn't see until now. So I'll leave you with this provocative question to ponder before your next big meeting. Which invisible rulebook are you unknowingly enforcing in your own leadership style?
Really take a hard look at what you measure, who you listen to, and how you define success. Now that you've got this X-ray vision, use it to deeply understand your teams, bridge those divides, and build much stronger, more resilient organizations. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope you put this diagnostic toolkit to work right away.